For the first DIY, I'm going to use one of the woodplex signs from the Dollar Tree that has home cut out on it and one of their long board signs. Now, 4th of July, if you haven't noticed, doesn't have a lot of crafting supplies. At least my Dollar Generals don't. So sometimes you have to get creative and use some items from the crafter square. My skinny sign is a little long, so I'm going to have to cut that down. And I noticed there were some tabs, maybe from how they cut those out at the Dollar Tree, but it was easy enough to trim those off. I'm going to take the long board sign and take it to my saw, cutting it shorter so it will be small enough to fit behind the home. I want that to be behind it. I want to do stars and stripes on this one, and I want to do stripes on the home sign. I thought home would be perfect because home of the brave, home is the United States, so I thought it kind of made sense. The first thing I'm going to do is cover the entire thing with white acrylic paint. I thought that it would be easier to use a foam brush on this, but I think it might have been a little bit easier to use a roller on it. I found that the cutout of the letters was making my foam brushes fall apart a little bit, but I was able to get this painted white. And I also took the time to go around the inside of the letters because I noticed some of my white paint dripped down, and compared to like the wood burning they used to cut these out, it was kind of noticeable. And so it took a little bit of extra time, but I went in and painted the inside of my letters white as well. What I want to do is flag stripes. The mistake I made, though, was using Dollar Tree painter's tape. Sometimes I have success with this, but for flag stripes, you might want to use like some 3M or some better brand, maybe stickier painter's tape, because I noticed I did get some bleeding. To avoid bleeding, I thought I'll just use a Dollar Tree roller. You get all of those items for $1.25. The brushes, the gloves, the tray, the roller, and now it comes with like a replacement roller, so that's really cool. And I'm just going to use red acrylic paint for my stripes. The reason I chose the cheaper Dollar Tree painter's tape is because it was about the right size that I wanted for my flag stripes. I want to do vertical stripes on this one, and I'm just going to go over it with some red acrylic. I thought rolling over it with the sponge roller lightly that I wouldn't get a lot of bleeding. I think it was the painter's tape for real though, because I did get some bleeding and I did have to touch that up. Because red paint, when it gets on something, it's really kind of hard to cover up. I'll show you here what kind of bleeding I'm talking about. I'm going to distress it, but it was a little bit too much bleeding for my taste. So I decided to make it look a little bit better. I'm just going to tape off my red lines with some better painter's tape and then touch up the areas that bled with some more white acrylic. So this project probably had the most painting time today because I had to touch up these lines. But with flag stripes, that is something you're going to want to be really crisp. And I thought the vertical looked better on this one. What I'm going to do is do the flag stars to peek out from behind the letters to spell out the word home for the stars and stripes. And since I went ahead and painted the inside of my letters, I did go ahead and paint the inside of my letters red too, to kind of make that a little bit more cohesive going down the sign. For the sign behind it, I'm going to use one of the Dollar Tree chair covers. This is not a flag. Every single time I craft with these, I get people in the comments telling me that I can't cut this. It's a chair cover. It's not a real flag, people. And I'm just going to use the star part. And I'm just going to cut out that section. I was hoping that it was going to be large enough to cover the entire sign, but I did end up having to use two of these because it wasn't quite as big as I thought it was. So I can cover about 2/3 of the sign, maybe 3/4. And so I'm going to use another one for the final piece and kind of piece it together, just making sure that I don't really have a seam in between where the letters are peeking through. I don't want that to be real noticeable. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out another of the star patterns. Other things you can use for the star patterns from the Dollar Tree, like wind socks, bandanas. I've crafted with lots of things to try to get the stars and stripes. And I covered my sign with Mod Podge, and I don't know about you, but I always use too much. I always put it on like I put on paint, I think, and you don't really need that much. So I spread that out, and then I'm going to lay my stars right on top using a paper towel to make sure it's all adhered, there's no air bubbles or anything like that. Kind of letting the Mod Podge seep through it to seal the top of it as well. And then I'm going to cut this right where the stars start here so I can kind of get my pattern to match up here and add the second part here for the bottom and maybe right about right there. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and let that Mod Podge dry before I try to cut off my excess fabric. And this sign is just big enough to cover up the letters. So the width of it is what I'm talking about. It's pretty much exactly the right size. And you wouldn't really have to have this. You could just cover the back of it with fabric. But these thinner Dollar Tree signs, whenever I can layer them, it makes them thicker, a little bit more substantial. I'm usually happier with them. So I let it dry. I cut off my excess material. I poked holes in the fabric so that I could reattach a hanger since this already has holes in it. I'm going to do that for this sign because the other sign doesn't have any holes for a hanger, and I want this to be a hanging sign. If you wanted to make this like a leaner sign, you could skip this part. I just put a little hot glue on the end to make it easier to go through, and I'm tying these on the back because I'm going to sandwich the twine there in between the two signs, so I'm going to need that to lay flat on the front side. So I just knotted them on the back, and now we can start putting this sign together. There's definitely a multi-step process to this sign. I'm going to use hot glue, and I have to kind of work quickly because there was lots of areas there I needed to add hot glue to because, again, it's not the same width as the sign. I really had to do it above and below each one of the letters. To decorate the hanger and make it not quite so plain, I'm going to use some raffia. This is some of the red raffia from Christmas. Sometimes I keep some of my Christmas stuff, like the stars, the raffia, things like that that are red, and kind of save them for 4th of July, sometimes even Valentine's Day, because Christmas they seem to have a lot more red stuff. So I'm just going to make a very simple bow by doing 2 loops, 2 sets of tails. I'm not a big fan of working with raffia, but I thought it would look good for this. I used a second piece to tie around to form the bow like this, and it's a little crazy now. I will trim that up a little bit, but first I'm going to tie it to the hanger. And the same piece of raffia I used to tie it together, I'm going to use to tie to the twine. You can't pull super tight with a raffia. You might want to use twine if you find that your raffia is breaking, but mine seem to work. And I just going to pull the tails down together and trim them off. I don't mind if it is a little bit wild. And then I want a primitive vibe to all of these 4th of July DIYs today. So I want them to look old, distressed, very old school Americana. So I'm going to distress mine with some Antique Wax by Waverly. I go over the white stripes with the Antique Wax by Waverly, and I go over the red stripes with just some white acrylic. And I'm using those chunky brushes from the Dollar Tree, making sure to drag them in all one direction to distress. If I get it a little bit too heavy anywhere, I will wipe off the excess with a baby wipe. And for you people that do not like distressing, just skip this step. And I think it looks really cute with that level of distress. I do want to frame it out to make it even thicker and add a little bit of wood to it. To do that, I'm using one of these easel kits from the Dollar Tree. I've been crafting with these a lot lately. They have some really great pieces of wood in there. I'm going to use the 2 longer pieces here for the sides. They're the perfect length. All I have to do is kind of cut off the little slanted part here at the end with my saw. And then I have another piece that is the stand that is the same size wood. So that's going to work out perfectly. I'm going to cut that. This is going to be big enough for the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to go to my saw and cut that down to 2 more pieces of that. And I am cutting them a little bit shorter than going all the way to the edge. I wanted that layered look to this frame. And so I think that that is going to look really cool and add a lot of personality to the sign. I do want to stain them with some Antique Wax by Waverly to bring out that beautiful wood grain in them. You only have to stain 3 sides, but on the larger ones, I stained all 4 sides because I liked the wood grain on one side better, and I kind of wanted that side to go up. As you can see, they definitely don't look the same on each side, so just pick your favorite side for the front where everybody's going to be able to see it. And I found that the little stencil dauber sponges work great for staining these. one of the small ones. And then I'm just going to glue these actually onto the front of the sign to frame these out. Not going all the way to the edge. As you can see, a little bit of red and white flag is going to be peeking out from the sides. But I'm really happy I did this because the home sign itself is really thin. And even with the other sign I added behind it, still super thin since it didn't really go all the way to the sides. So this added a little bit more fun to it, I think. I'm just attaching them with hot glue and just gluing a square. I'm definitely going to have to pick up more of these easel kits because I've been finding so many uses for them. I love that it comes disassembled like that and you can use the pieces for whatever you want. So I hot glued those all on. I think that this little home sign is ready to go. Let me show you how cute this turned out. Definitely, probably a little bit more painting than I was expecting with this project, but I do like the final result. I love the primitive vibe for 4th of July.